Welcome, everybody. I think we'll get started. Thanks for this wonderful showing from the College of Business. Very impressive. And so today we're going to hear from one of your own, Brent Opall. Do students really learn from second chances?
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you all for being here. I was happy to get the invite. So I do want to start by thanking Christy Lauber. One of the, she's the other instructor of Management 449, where this, the capstone course where this simulation originated. And although I've led the endeavor for the research, it wasn't my idea to give a redo opportunity. That is something I inherited as part of the course when I came here a year ago, and Professor Lauber had been doing that for some time. So I can't take credit for the idea of the redo in the simulation. So, but I want to start by talking about a little bit of the background about a course simulation. From a broad perspective, a simulation is an experience that mirrors the real world. So those simulations could include, you probably have seen pictures of pilots in training where they're here running a computer simulation about flying a plane. That's a simulation. I know there are some simulations here at UW-Eau Claire in another college that mirror the provider-patient relationship in healthcare as a simulation. The simulation we use in strategic management, the capstone course in the College of Business, one of the capstone courses in the College of Business, is a simulation that allows students to run a global camera and drone company. So they sell their products in multiple areas of the globe. They all manufacture in Taiwan. And they make, I'll show you a picture of, or the actual website. Here is just one of their many decision screens. So we place students in teams, and in those teams, they make decisions on price of their camera, and they make decisions on where they want to emphasize their marketing, and they make decisions on how much corporate social responsibility they want to invest in, what kind of discounts or sales they want to have on their devices, what they want to invest as far as quality and production, how many products do they actually want to produce. I haven't counted, but there's hundreds of decisions in my estimate that they will make as far as the simulation. And they make these every time the simulation runs. So that gives you an idea of what our simulation looks like. It's called Globus. And again, students run a global camera and drone company. The cameras are wearable cameras, so similar to what you would see in like a GoPro. And in the review of the literature and pulling together this research, I found a couple things. That simulations are growing in their use of effectiveness. So there's a lot of literature out there that says simulations, regardless of discipline, I'm going to talk about it in management, but regardless of discipline, that they are growing in their effectiveness. We have also seen that the number and diversity of simulations is fast growing very quickly, partly due to technological advances, and many people have seen the use of the effective use of simulations, so it has continued to spur their growth. And a lot of institutions are looking for hands-on kind of experiential learning exercises for students, which has further increased the number of simulations that are available or contributed to that increase. And what we do in strategic management, where this simulation is found, we do the simulation, I think, in a unique way. And this is, I taught this course at a different university previously, where we just ran the simulation once over the entire semester. Coming here, I was introduced to the concept of running it for part of the semester and then giving it to students a redo opportunity, so where they get to redo the simulation all over again. And I've really enjoyed that new format. So walking you quickly through the format here, before students start the simulation, they write a strategic plan for running their company. And I always pitch this that students should put themselves in the seats of the C-suite, so CEO, CFO, Chief Human Resources Officer, and so forth. And that they will be making decisions from that management team to run the entire company. So that's where they write their mission, vision, set out some strategic and financial objectives for how they want to run their company. That's the strategic plan. Round one is the first round of the simulation. And in that simulation, in round 1, we run it for 6 weeks, which mirror 6 years of financial of firm performance. And we start at year 5. So students have a history to look back upon, but all student teams that are running the simulation, all student teams start on equal footing so that their financial scores are exactly the same as far as how they start the company. But then starting with that first round of decisions, you start to see companies pull apart from each other. What I like to see is students get really, in a good way, competitive about it. I hear them talking, when they come into class or when they're leaving class about their team was third, they really want to get to first, or how they waited up until midnight to get the email as far as where they placed. So I can tell that there's some competitiveness, which I'm not surprised in business students, some competitiveness there that I think contributes to their learning in the exercise. So they run the first round for 6 weeks, and each time each week represents a year of performance for the company in the industry, and they get the results every Wednesday. After that 6 weeks, we take a pause, and we ask students to reflect on how their company performed. Not only how the students work together as teams, but also ask them to specifically look at the performance of the company they ran. And the unique way in which we have students do the redo opportunity is that after that reflection, after that first round of 6 weeks, we bring all of our strategic management courses together for round 2. And what we do is, instead of running the simulation once a week for 6 weeks, we bring all 5 or 6 sections together for one night, where they make the first decision before they arrive, but then together in one of our large auditoriums here on campus, students run the second round every half hour for a one evening commitment, one evening event. We call it the Sim Super Bowl. Students are already, it's November 15th, students are already talking about that. They've got several weeks of their decisions already made. They're talking about what they want to do for that second redo opportunity. And what I want to make clear is, in that redo opportunity, everything starts over. So after their first 6 weeks, we erase all of the data. Teams start back to the same exact footing that they were on for the first round in week 1, and they start over. And so that gives students an opportunity to either continue their strategy. So some students have found that, if they have chosen, one of the strategies might be a focused low-cost strategy. If they have found that as worked very well as a strategy for them, they may stick with it. But when they stick with it, they did learn from some mistakes, so they'll probably hone or tweak their strategy for that second round. Or students, maybe if they finished in 7th or 8th place and weren't happy with their performance as a firm, will throw out their strategy altogether and start over. But between the two, so we ask them to reflect and develop some ideas on how they want to approach that second round. We bring them back for the Sim Super Bowl, which is round 2. And then after round 2, we ask them to reflect again, to go back and reflect on what worked well, what didn't work well. And again, that can be on the performance of their company in the simulation, or it can be, we often find that teams also reflect on how well they worked together as a team in that experience as well. Yeah?
So these teams would still have the same mission, the same vision, the same everything. They'll just have to redo how they basically achieve their objectives, right?
They could.
Can they revise their mission and vision and everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole
Yep. So we don't ask students to rewrite a mission and vision, but what we do ask students to do, and they could, I've certainly seen students do that, but what we do ask students to do is re-identify which strategy they're going to follow. So in the strategy course, we talk about low-cost providers, best-cost providers, and so forth. That they can throw out or keep, they can choose. And often then, their mission and vision would change if they start over, but they don't have to rewrite it and give it back to us. But how they execute the strategy would be different in the simulation. Good question, though. Thank you. So the question we researched was, does providing that redo opportunity, because again, I think it's a unique opportunity, does providing that redo opportunity improve student learning? Does it improve their understanding of strategic management? And we defined learning as understanding basic strategic concepts in both executing strategy, and also a key outcome of our course is teamwork or interdisciplinary decisions, where students make decisions across their majors, because this is a capstone. It should focus in on those kinds of decision making and skills. And in researching, or the sample that we used for that research question, for several years on D2L, we have been collecting these assignments as students have completed them. So we got approval from IRB after data collection to go back for the past 5 years, pull those assignments off of D2L, and do a qualitative case study where we coded those assignments for themes that emerged, looking at answering whether or not students learned more from having that second redo opportunity. Although we have 5 years of data, at this point we've only gone back to 2015, so we've got the past 2 years. That covers 882 students, or about 220 odd teams in our research. So those were a lot of documents to go through. Our goal is to go back all 5 years before submitting this to a scholarly journal. We used descriptive case study in our analysis. So specifically, we took the assignments, we put them in Vivo, which is a qualitative software program. We coded those assignments for specific themes. What I like about qualitative data is you can certainly go into, and this follows the spirit of qualitative research, you go into it with your ideas. So we had some ideas of what we would see. But in that qualitative research, you can also let ideas emerge. So once we saw some themes start reoccurring, we could go back and recode for those. So it is, not only do you bring your own ideas as a researcher to the table, but you can also identify themes that you didn't expect to see there, that you discovered along your journey as far as the research. So we did both, predetermined themes and ones that emerged. And through the data analysis, the first step that we completed was de-identifying the data so that what we were coding didn't have any reference to student teams, to student names. Quite often students would write about each other, they'd call them by name, of course, right? So some of that was positive, and that's usually what it was, but some of it, when teams struggled, may also not have been reflect well on them as individuals. We decoded the data, then we reduced the data where in data reduction, assignments were categorized, we organized them, we verified that they were accurate, and this again occurs all in the in vivo software. And then for displaying is when we actually coded the data, so that using the software we could pull any one of the themes that we saw emerging, and we could pull all of the student comments from those assignments that we had coded for those themes, again in support of our research question. And then at the end is where we drew our conclusions, and our conclusions were specifically 3 results, all in support of yes, students do learn more through a redo opportunity. So the 3 major themes that emerged from our research was first, students used financial and strategic objectives more often and in a more detailed way from the first round to the second round. The second thing we saw is that they had an expanded understanding of what it truly meant to work across disciplines. So we saw students write more about decision-making in ways that included the finance perspective, the accounting perspective, HR perspective, marketing perspective. So we saw that represented in the work much more often in the second round than we did compared to the first. And then, I'm sorry, that was the third theme. And then the second theme was that we saw students reference a lot more of the distinguishing features of our 5 generic strategies, which is kind of the keystone for what we study in strategic management. Students referenced the differences and distinguishing features of those 5 generic strategies much more often the second time around than they did compared to the first. And I'll give you some examples of that. So here are, as far as the number of times we saw those themes represented, by far the most common one that we saw increase was strategic objectives, followed by financial objectives. And we put those together in one theme, the use of financial and strategic objectives. The second theme had 370 unique references across the 800 assignments, or 800 students. And then the third theme had of integration had 133. So that's, we ranked them when we came out. So the most common was increased use of financial and strategic, followed by distinguishing features of the 5 generic strategies and so forth. So they were ranked that way. But here are some examples. So in increased use of financial and strategic objectives, we saw an increase of almost 53%, first round to the second round. Number of unique references to strategic objectives increased by almost 35%, first round to second round. But what I find, those numbers are useful, but what I find valuable in qualitative research is actually reading the differences in student comments. Quite often from the qualitative perspective, it's the language that students use, or it's the descriptive qualities that give you an understanding of that experience. So first round, as an example, one student team wrote they find an effective price margin in order to raise EPS and ROE, earnings per share, and so forth. Versus that same student team in the second time wrote, earnings per share should never go under $1. This simple improvement has tremendous benefits when it comes to shareholder relations, our image as a company, and our willingness for investors to work with us. So you can see just by reading those quotations, their insight and depth of understanding is much richer. First round to second round, giving them that redo opportunity. The second theme, distinguishing features of the 5 generic strategies, we saw that increase by 28%. Here are some examples of language students used for that. First round, to give consumers more value for their money, all while being able to satisfy customer expectations. Again, it's good, but in the second, same team wrote the second time around, when setting price, we plan on having it the lowest price from the start. By being the first mover with our price point, we will find ourselves in a situation where competition has to attempt to reach our price point and play catch up, right? So again, they describe that experience in a much richer way, pointing more towards some of the distinguishing features that we see set the strategies apart from each other. They reference them much more often the second time versus the first when writing and reflecting about them. The third theme, integration across disciplines, we saw a 33% increase in the references to making decisions across disciplines, first round versus second round. So first round, a quotation from that, implementation of the best value strategy will require the knowledge of our 5 executives, each who has their own expertise. Right? Versus second time, we started off with a price that was much lower than the industry average, leading to a large stock outages, causing us to lose sales. We lost a significant amount of market share because of this, and we had to work to get back for the remainder of the simulation. And in reading those comments, some things that you can see from the left column to the right column is students, and we picked this up as researchers, students started to use instead of I or we as individual team members and moved to we. So that was one way that we saw that come out. But then we also saw in that description strategies where they identified how they worked across different focus areas of study. So how I, as an accounting student, worked with the HR student to come up with an idea of what we should really be paying our employees, right? So we saw more detail and contextual references to working across disciplines in the way that we didn't see that amount of detail or depth of understanding and willingness to do so first round. And so we saw that quite often more in the second. The other thing that I would like to point out for this one is that students, I felt in reading through in their second round reflection versus the first round, felt that students demonstrated their understanding of the success from working across disciplines much more. So they talked about the challenges of working together, maybe trying to understand areas that wasn't their expertise to come up with a decision that benefited the entire team. And I think that's important to note as well. That was represented in a more significant way in the second reflection compared to the first. I think there are a couple implications for practice here. First, I I think that simulation-based learning across the board, and this goes back to the research that was previously done, is that simulation-based learning is an effective tool for teaching, for students to learn concepts. When I was doing the literature review, although it was very well reinforced that SBL is effective, there are still a lot of questions, especially in the management, in the SOTL focus area, or the SOTL area of management education. There was a lot of questions about how effective it is, or the best uses of simulation-based learning in teaching management. So although the literature review said that yes, it's important, and yes, students learn from it, there are still some questions to be answered. I reinforce that yes, students can, through this research, reinforce that yes, students can learn from it, but also that question of how best to use it, I think can be answered with the second two implications for practice here. I think by providing students a second chance, or that redo opportunity, they learn more. And I think that is well demonstrated, at least in this research understanding. Specifically, they understand the concepts better, they understand the importance of working across disciplines or as a team much better. And then finally, I think that this is an opportunity to talk about how a redo opportunity could be a benefit in the course. I know when we were talking before the session started, in my mind, there's areas of the way we teach that are great opportunities for redo opportunities, and then there's those that are not. So as an example, we were talking about exams and whether a redo on an exam is appropriate fit or not. Well, we could debate that, but I think with simulation-based learning, where it is less focused on the individual understanding and maybe more on some of the soft skills of teamwork, and maybe some more on the understanding of complex processes that work across teams, SBL, or simulation-based learning, could be a very effective format if offered in a second chance redo opportunity that students could really learn from. So I did want to save, and I got through this quicker than I anticipated, but I did want to save plenty of time for discussion and question and answer as far as the research. Yes, Karen.
So what kind of prompts did you provide for the reflection, and were the prompts exactly the same for the first round and the second round?
Okay. They were similar, but not exactly the same. So the biggest difference between the first round reflection and the second reflection was in the first reflection, we did ask them to write a mission vision statement. We didn't ask them to the second time. But in a similar way, we do ask what was effective, what worked, in both reflections, and what would they improve upon for the second one. So those kinds of questions are the same. The other questions that are the same is which strategy are you choosing, or which strategy are you keeping, why or why not? So those were the same. But there was a small variation in the beginning of the assignment. Yeah, Jerry?
I'm going to preference this. I'm not a researcher.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'm assuming you're giving lectures throughout the semester,
Mm-hmm.
on the topic, even though it is a capstone course, they're drawing from other courses.
Yes.
So we have an increase from the first simulation to the second simulation, which are pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
How do you control for what they're learning through the lectures over the course of the semester?
So that would be the biggest variable that I would say we can't control for, because over the first 6 weeks of the semester, we do cover a significant amount of that content. I'm sorry, not the first 6 weeks, the 6 weeks that we do the simulation. But we do get through probably, the way we have the course structured is students finish with their study of strategy in the first 2/3 of the course. So they are wrapped up with, about the end of the first simulation is when they have completed getting through the course reading as we've gotten through our lectures, and then we move to the Sim Super Bowl and some case studies and some other things where they continue to apply that. So there is, I think that is a limitation of the study, that we're covering content as they're going through the first 6 weeks, where we've wrapped it up by the time they do the Sim Super Bowl.
Okay. Then my second question, knowing the way students work,
Yeah.
if someone is watching a group be very successful in the first simulation, someone's going to get to someone in that group and say, what are you doing differently
Yeah.
than me?
Yeah.
And that sharing of information probably is going to be almost a group think. Everyone's going to have a better plan based on maybe the top 2 or 3
Mm-hmm.
finishers.
Yeah.
Does that happen, or can you actually separate that? And do they kind of sign a, non-disclosure that they're not going to share what they're doing?
They do not sign a non-disclosure, but what I do think they have a shared understanding with their team is that they don't, especially if they're doing well, they're going to try to keep their trade a secret for their company in their industry, right? They don't want the other teams to see that, to know what they are doing to get there. Now, what I do like about the simulation is they have competitive industry reports. So you can see, just like in publicly traded companies, you can look at financial performance and a lot of the other stuff that is associated with what they are required by law to put out in the public domain. This simulation mirrors that. They can pull things like stock price and some other things. They can do a strategic group map of where their company falls compared to others along different comparisons. So they can get some of that information, but I suspect that student teams that are doing well are very tight-lipped about what they're doing to do well.
Okay.
In fact, when I talk to teams, I almost know immediately the teams that are doing really well, because they'll start to whisper to me when they're talking about which strategy they're choosing and what challenges they're having. Whereas the teams that are ranked 7 or 8 out of 8 are very loudmouth about the mistakes they made, or they're willing to talk about it much more often. So although I think there's some risk there, I don't think that happens very often.
Maybe if you added a non-disclosure amongst the teams,
Yeah.
that they sign it, that would be another, maybe lessen that variable a little bit. But
Yeah.
I can imagine when they get down on Water Street and they start talking about how their teams are doing. You might have some loose lips out there.
You might.
Really think
You might.
Water Street or students are talking about class?
Yes. They are.
I don't think so.
I
Yeah.
have 3 daughters going there. They're all about my lectures on Water Street.
Tim, you had a question too.
Jerry's question
Yeah.
kind of brings me to my question.
Mm-hmm.
Does the success of a particular strategy in the simulation depend on what strategies the other companies are using?
Yes.
It does.
Mm-hmm. So what I tell students what we tell students when we introduce the strategy is any one of the 5 strategies can win the simulation, as far as performance, but depending upon the mix of other strategies being implemented in your industry, who is successful could look very different from one industry, which is a class, to another industry.
So if I'm the only one doing low cost,
You're going to do very well.
trying to do low cost.
Yes. Yep.
And I gotta jump in.
Yeah, of course.
So one thing is, when they go into the Sim Super Bowl, they're in completely different industries. So
Mhm.
they have all new competitors.
Yep.
So the first round, they're competing against just their classmates. The second round, we split them up into industries so that they're competing against all 5 of the different classes. So it's a completely new industry.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, I always give my students the example of the team that they just had the simulation figured out. And they went in, and the first round they won with more of a high-end differentiated strategy. And they went into the Sim Super Bowl and they intended to go with that route, but when they saw what all their competitors were doing, they completely switched their
Yep.
strategy, or maybe it was vice versa, and they won again with the exact opposite strategy. And so it very much depends on the competitors more than anything. And so it's really fun when a team has it figured out enough to be able to win with multiple types of strategy.
So did you guys
Yeah.
found that the winners from the first round, or those who ranked high, were got the same ranking basically in the second round?
Oh.
Did you? It was
All
just
over the place.
really?
Yeah. My experience is it's a 50-50 chance, though. If you think about top performer versus bottom performer,
Interesting.
yeah, because the industry changes. Yeah, and some students, student teams have the ability to either keep or change their strategy,
Right.
which changes the shape of that industry.
And by default, it's much more competitive the second round,
Yeah.
because now they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how
grading figures into this.
Mm.
What of this is graded?
So the assignments are graded individually. So when they write their strategic, actually I think each one of these pieces are graded. The strategic plan is graded. The reflection is all the 3 written pieces. So the strategic plan, reflection and scorecard, and reflection are all graded. And those are graded when students submit it to D2L. We grade them for the quality. We have a grading. I have a grading rubric for that. And then round 1 and round 2 of the simulation is also graded, and it is graded on performance. So how well student teams do. That said, they start at a grade of C. So the worst they could do just by trying is a letter grade of C. That's typically not where we see students fall. And then we weight it, so whichever one, round 1 versus round 2, whichever one they perform better in is counted more towards their grade. So it's a 90-70 split. So if they do best in the Sim Super Bowl, 90 points, the percentage of those 90 points is what goes in versus a percentage on the 6-week version over the semester at 70 points. But all of those pieces are graded. Students get a little, at the beginning of the semester, I sense and the questions I get from students about grading a group project that depends upon how well they perform can make them a little bit, it's stressful for some of them. I try to stress that you started to see, you only work up from there. We share how we grade them and we look at scores. And so the other thing we do too is when we're figuring out their score, we don't take it just from where they finished, because there's a lot of, especially in the last couple years of that decision making, some companies and teams will take some big risks to improve their performance, right? So not to disadvantage those student teams, we take wherever they peaked. So one of the things we grade on is their EPS score. We take which year that score was highest, not where they ended, in figuring out their grade. That's correct, right? You had your eye, you were looking.
We look at both the overall average for all of the years and
The individual score, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's the highest.
Mm-hmm.
So Brent, how are these teams formed? How do you form these teams? Do you ask them just pick a team?
Nope. Week 1, very first class, they fill out a note card. And one of the questions is, what's your major or majors? And then although it's never in equal representation, I sort those cards first by trying my best to have an equal representation of all of those majors in each team. Where I often fall short, and I don't know if Christy, this has been your experience, where I often fall short is HR majors. I often have more than enough marketing to go around, sometimes 2 per group. Same thing with accounting and finance. I can get 1 or 2 per group, but it's some of our smaller majors that is harder to find at least 1 person. But usually it's pretty close.
Are they equal in terms of size?
Yeah, they are equal. And maybe there's, if it's an odd number, there'll be 1 team that's 1 person smaller, but size of the team is the same. Yeah?
Was there any, you talked about how you went into the research, were there any themes that you went into it with a thought that you were going to find it and didn't? I mean, you said when you did your research,
Yeah.
you had certain impressions
Yeah.
of stuff you were looking for and other things kind of rose. I'm just curious if you had something,
Mm-hmm.
because you showed the 3 things that you're most focused on. Is there something that didn't or surprised you when you did it? I don't know.
The one that surprised me is that quite often where I see students struggle in writing is about financial performance. And it surprised me that that came out as the strongest change from round 1 to round 2, is their increased use of, because although we touch on a couple financial concepts throughout the course, it's not a finance course, so I was surprised by the dramatic increase, and that was the #1 theme that came through, is their increased use of financial performance metrics in describing what they wanted to achieve. That's the piece that surprised me the most. And that's often where I see, like I said, where I see students struggle, is they're hesitant, especially if you're a non-finance or accounting student, to use those kind of metrics. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.